Hello gentlemen, this is II MGTOW. I decided to take a break from making videos for a while, just simply because, I've been traveling a lot, and I haven't been particularly motivated. But, upon watching Coltane's most recent video, a fantastic video by the way, which I'm going to be linking to in the description bar, I found the motivation again. So, this video is the second video in the series where I respond to both Turd-Flinging Monkey and No Holds Barred. TFM is of course more free market and limited government orientated, and I'll be using the term laissez-faire in this video when referring to his position, and that is an economic system in which transactions between private parties are free from government interference, such as regulations, state-granted privileges, tariffs, and subsidies. In his video on the topic, which I will of course also be linking to below, TFM gives an excellent defense of the laissez-faire system. I really don't have a lot that I can disagree with in what he said. However, I will still be arguing that it is a suboptimal system for the reasons of practicality and desirability. You will soon see why. Also, No Holds Barred has given a really excellent defense of a resource-based economy on his channel. The link is also below, and again, in my opinion, it's a suboptimal system for the reasons of both practicality and desirability, and I'm going to explore this in this video. And I'm going to state categorically, before I start this video, that even if a social and economic system works as intended, if its inner contradictions are somehow mitigated, it may be suboptimal, and I'm going to explain why. Before you watch this video, I want you to do something. Can you cast a vote, so to speak? Can you decide in which group you belong on the following matters? A yay or a nay will suffice. Firstly, all adult females ought to have the right to vote, yay or nay. Secondly, all adult males ought to have the right to vote. Thirdly, the best government is one that governs the least. Fourth, my individual liberty is of paramount importance to me. Fifth, I am against government policies that reduce my individual rights. And number 6, it's important that our species preserve the Earth's natural resources. I'm going to be asking you these very same questions at the end of this video, and I want you to reflect on any answers of yours that change, if any do, of course. In this video, I'm going to attempt to also present the case for what I term a scientific meritocracy, and Coltane has discussed this in his latest video, that although we do have a democracy within the Western governments, it is, to one degree or another, a kind of technocracy. So, to really explain the concept of a scientific meritocracy, what I'm going to be doing in this video is presenting you with the most important problems we face as a species, their cause and their possible end results, and why the current and most proposed systems of social cooperation are ill-suited to solving them. I'm going to be comparing the merits of a scientific meritocracy to a laissez-faire model and a resource-based economy, but also focusing on why, although laissez-faire will certainly give more freedom plus wealth, and a resource-based economy will certainly help preserve more of the Earth's natural resources, they are both rather short-sighted approaches to humanity's problems. About 5 years ago, a group of budget holders in the pharmaceutical industry started asking the agency I founded, and myself, a very, very simple question. It was around the time when Twitter, Facebook, and the rest of social media were becoming major communication platforms, and social media seemed to represent, at least at the time, a very real way to cost-effectively reach prescribers and patients. And the question they asked was, is Twitter a good fit for my drug? Or can I market my brand through Facebook? My response was rarely what they wanted to hear, and it was, well, it really depends on what you're trying to achieve. If you wish to have an extremely basic transfer of information to an audience of patients, Twitter may be fine. If, however, you wish to have a transfer of skills from a physician expert to a community medical doctor, then social media really is suboptimal. Your traditional methods of education are better, I would say to them. For example, hands-on workshops or training seminars. And that really is going to be the basis of my thesis. No one system is inherently good or bad. It really depends on your goals as a species. A free market system is a good system, an incredibly good system, at creating wealth and improving the lot of billions. It has shown this consistently, for example, during the past industrial and the current information technology revolutions. A resource-based economy will, of course, also have its role, perhaps at some specific points in the future, or in the past it may have also excelled, where perhaps we have a much smaller number of humans who overwhelmingly hold very, very different attitudes versus our current collective stance to the pressures facing our species, particularly on environmental and resource-related matters. Then a resource-based economy might come into its own and function like no other system before it ever has. Before continuing, let's try to get some clarity on a number of important concepts which, within the context of this video, are certainly interlaced. Firstly, the fundamental psychological characteristics of the current human stock, and that is, number one, humans are risk adverse, incredibly so. We form tribes which later become cities or towns to provide safety. We establish insurance companies to pool risk and reduce uncertainty, and stay close to people who look like us to reduce the risk of predation at the hands of strangers. Number two, we have an aversion to the more extreme forms of natural selection. I've argued this before in one of my least popular videos, where I argue, for this and some other reasons, that evolution has stopped or paused for humans. But just kind of coming back to the topic, we are as a species less willing than, let's say, other animals to allow the sick to die, or the old, or the infirm, or to even suffer to a large extent. We even extend this morality to members of the animal kingdom, where we establish sanctuaries to prevent their extinction. Number three, humans are gynocentric. We prioritize the needs of women, who are, of course, the limiting factor in reproduction. And number four, humans are insatiable in their desires, demanding ever-increasing and ever cheaper satisfaction of material wants. Number five, the idea or flavor of freedom, which many within MGTOW hold as absolute, are actually not human universals. That is that there may simply be more freedom-orientated MGTOW than there are in the general public in percentage terms. Number six, humans make trade-offs, rarely holding to absolute positions. Number seven, humans love hierarchy. We abhor power vacuums and seek to fill them wherever possible. Number eight, humans respond to incentives. Number nine, humans are self-interested, remarkably so, and along gender lines. And number 10, human nature is largely fixed. Any differences are based on environments, which then, through a feedback loop, influences human nature. So keeping that in mind, when looking at both alternative systems, that is the resource-based economy and laissez-faire, one realizes that a belief about what we ought to value is inserted in each one. I don't condemn this. I do the same with my proposal on a scientific meritocracy, and I will later explain what my own value judgment is. But in going back to the value judgments inherent in the resource-based economy and laissez-faire, number one, a laissez-faire system, or its proponents, suggest that your greatest values ought to be, let's say, freedom of action and freedom of consumption. And number two, the proponents of a resource-based economy suggest that your highest values ought to be the preservation of human ecology. So here you might ask, CS, What is your own value judgment underlying your proposed system of scientific meritocracy? Well, it's simple: preservation of the species, specifically that the current human stock will find the Earth, our planet, both its birthplace and graveyard unless we leave it. It's not a matter of if, but when. We have made it this far almost entirely by chance. And that same chance will surely one day, one way or another, end us, unless we have become a species that is willing and able to put aside our differences and focus for extended periods of time, perhaps even millennia, on a single unifying goal, for example, to get off this planet and to colonize the stars. Unless we do this, we will, like all other species become us, become a genetic dead end. Before proceeding forward with the overall message of this video, I think it's also important to point out the known flaws inherent with both the laissez-faire system and the resource-based economy. Here, in this part of the video, I will speak specifically about the practicality or lack thereof of both systems. Please do note that I will not consciously insert any value judgments here. I will, unfortunately, have to do that later, and I'll let you know when I'm inserting a value judgment. I will merely aim to accurately, as I see it, describe the human ape, and for the reasons described below, both the laissez-faire and the resource-based economy are actually suboptimal, not because these systems lack merit in specific scenarios, but because they go counter to the basic needs of humans. So this has to do with their practicality versus the human stock. Firstly, within a laissez-faire system, we are likely to experience the kind of ruthless natural selection that would leave many of us profoundly disturbed. If you happen to be poor, or to fall on hard times, or become disabled, there is a chance, a very good one, that you will simply starve to death. While private charities may actually well exist, their resources will be limited, and they may simply refuse to extend their compassion to you in your time of need. Nowadays, the vast majority of humans do not wish to leave the lives of those who fall on hard times to such a lottery. Humans seek certainty in such matters, so the laissez-faire system clashes with point 1, that is that humans are risk-averse, and point 2, we have an aversion to natural selection, for humans at least. Secondly, the main arguments for a laissez-faire system, which are excellent ones in my opinion, relate to the higher standard of material well-being many humans will enjoy under it, and the fact that you have less government intrusion into your lives, which of course means you are freer. However, this is not a human universal. At least half of the species, predominantly female, I would argue, are more interested in having protection from misfortune. So a system such as that of a laissez-faire free market system is to a greater extent unworkable because it's unaligned with point 5, that is that the higher standards of material well-being and freedom are not necessarily human universals. In this section, I don't speak about the desirability or lack thereof of a laissez-faire system, mainly its impracticality. Later, I will address its lack of desirability. If we decided collectively to abolish government today, and I do see the irony in that statement, a group of men and women will simply, very quickly establish a new one and fill the power vacuum. Almost overnight, the limited government free market certainly contradicts point 7 of human nature, and that humans love hierarchy, we abhor power vacuums, and seek to fill them wherever possible. Now, let's take a look at a resource-based economy and specifically its practicality. In a resource-based economy, all goods and services are available to all people without the needs for a means of exchange such as money, credits, barter, or other means. For this to be achieved, all resources must be declared as common heritage to all persons. Upon immediate glance, one can describe a resource-based economy as, from each according to his ability. This is, of course, a slogan first used by Louis Blanc in 1851. You see, the biggest impediment to a resource-based economy is human nature. You will need a fundamentally different type of human being for this to ever work. From the early times, ideologists of communism have long identified that a new type of man and woman was needed to usher in a socialist utopia. They acknowledged the limitations of humans and postulated that within a new society of pure communism and social conditions therein, a new man and woman would be required to help develop the surrounding circumstances of post-scarcity and unprecedented scientific development. For example, Leon Trotsky wrote in 1924 in Literature and Revolution about the communist man or the man of the future. And he wrote, "Man will make it his purpose to master his own feelings, to rise his instincts to the heights of consciousness, to make them transparent, to extend the wires of his will into hidden recesses, and thereby raise himself to a new plane, to create a higher social biological type, or if you please, a Superman." Well, of course, communism failed. This new breed of man did not emerge. They had to work with humans as we are, unable to simultaneously pull a 16-hour workday at a steam mill and then do astrophysics by night. So a resource-based economy goes counter to point 9 in that human nature is fixed, and furthermore, a resource-based economy goes counter to point 8, which is that humans respond to incentives. In the absence of incentives, specifically financial payment, people will avoid the laborious, difficult, dirty, and dangerous jobs. At the moment, people are paid to do these jobs, and we still find a shortage of takers. Here I'm going to be tackling desirability. I will unfortunately, unavoidably, occasionally be inserting my own value judgments, but I will try to keep this to a minimum, since it's essential to also address the lack of desirability of either model, that is the resource-based economy, or the laissez-faire system. I'm going to be bringing your attention to a gentleman known as Carl Sagan. Sagan was an American astronomer, cosmologist, astrophysicist, astrobiologist, author, science popularizer, and science communicator in astronomy and other natural sciences. Carl Sagan once said, "Extinction is a rule, survival is the exception." This is a very fitting quote. Of all species that have existed on Earth, 99.9% are now extinct. Many of them perished in 5 cataclysmic events. According to a recent poll, 7 out of 10 biologists think we are currently in the throes of a 6th mass extinction event. Both the laissez-faire system and resource-based economy proponents ignore a number of highly probabilistic events, such as, for example, number 1, catastrophic solar flares. A repeat of the 1859 space weather event could paralyze modern life, according to Richard Lovett for the National Geographic News. A severe geomagnetic storm, in NASA's words, could disrupt power grids, radio communications, and GPS, as well as spark dazzling auroras. In 1859, such reports were mostly curiosities, but if something similar happens today, the world's high-tech infrastructure could grind to a halt. Number 2, national pandemics. These may pose the most serious risk of all. In fact, in the past 2 millennia, the only 2 events that experts can certify as global catastrophes of this scale were both plagues. The Black Death of the 1340s felled more than 10% of the world population. 8 centuries prior, another epidemic of the Yersinia pestis bacterium, I hope I've pronounced that correctly, also known as the Great Plague of Justinson, in 541 and 542, killed between 25 and 33 million people, or between 13 and 17% of the global population at the time. Number 3, we of course have climate change, and number 4, near-Earth objects. The list really can go on. It's not a matter of if, but when. And according to a new report from the UK-based Global Challenges Foundation, the possibility of this occurring is much more likely than we might think. In its annual report on global catastrophic risk, The not-for-profit brought out a startling statistic. Across the span of their lives, the average American is more than 5 times likelier to die during a human extinction event than in a car crash. Currently, humanity is beset by a number of problems, many of them insurmountable in my opinion. For example, runaway spending on social programs that will most certainly at one point bankrupt the Western world. Number two, rampant gynocentrism that criminalizes essentially the male half of the population, denies them access to equal justice and a fair part of tax proceeds. Number three, an electoral process fraught with fraud, pandering to the idiotic majority, whereby things are enjoyed today and paid for by later generations. Number four, the fact that at one point, perhaps in the near future, we will likely face an extinction level event, which we are currently hopelessly ill prepared for. Number five, we are hopelessly dependent for our survival and well-being on fuels and chemicals which render the planet less hospitable and habitable every passing hour. And number six, something that I've discussed in a number of videos now, overpopulation. Spikes in food prices tend to lead to social unrest. In 2007 and 2008, there were riots in 30 countries as commodities rose to record levels on global markets. Many analysts even say that food prices were an important background factor to the Arab Spring that started in 2011. Going forward, all of the ingredients are there for future instability. Though down from historic peaks, food prices, as measured by the Food and Agricultural Organization, are still higher than they've been in 30 years, and many people in import-dependent countries still spend a higher proportion of income on food, upwards of 70% in places like Ghana and Pakistan. Before continuing, and I believe this part of the video is going to be deeply unpopular with a lot of persons, particularly, I guess, the more free market-minded members of the MGTOW community, if we are even a community. And that is that it's important to note that the laissez-faire system has actually unwittingly created and exacerbated many of mankind's greatest problems. I'm going to give you two examples. Firstly, Norman Borlaug was an American biologist, humanitarian, and Nobel laureate who was called the father of the Green Revolution and agricultural's greatest spokesperson, in addition to being called the man who saved a billion lives. From 1942 to 1944, Borlaug was employed as a microbiologist at DuPont's in Wilmington, Delaware. Borlaug's work with weeds contributed to the development of high-yield, semi-dwarf indica and japonica rice. On screen, you're seeing the wheat yields in developing countries between the years 1950 to 2004. Baseline is 500 kilograms per hectare, and now you're seeing the on-screen, world population growth since the 1950s. Notice the growth in the developing world. Norman Borlaug and his team were incentivized. They saved a billion and consequently gave humanity a billion more mouths to feed. No doubt these extra mouths will then go on to reproduce and leave us with even more mouths to feed, and the trend of hunger goes on. And I don't blame them. The incentives to produce better variety of crops are there. After all, people need to eat. It's a guaranteed consumer base. If Norman didn't do it, somebody else certainly would have. Secondly, the laissez-faire system allows us in many ways to encourage members of the human species to get rich based on incremental improvements, also known as innovation. We have, as a society, since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, relied on innovation for growth. Robert Salow once quipped, "You can see the computer age everywhere, but in the productivity statistics." And there is a term for this, and it's known as the productivity paradox. You see, the productivity paradox has attracted a lot of attention because technology seems no longer able to create the kind of productivity gains that occurred until the early 1970s. Some, such as economist Robert Gordon, are now arguing that technology in general is subject to diminishing returns in its ability to increase economic growth. When we look at the iPhone, in total, Apple has sold more than 590 million iPhones from 2007 to 2014 worldwide. In the third quarter of 2015, iPhone sales accounted for more than 60% of Apple's total revenue. Please do keep in mind that Apple is, or was at the time, the largest company in the world. And the iPhone sales generated more than $31 billion US dollars in revenues for Apple. That is a lot of money. However, when you take a close look at an iPhone, it's simply a repackaged combination of earlier machines, including a word processor, telephony, portable music players, personal digital assistants, and handheld computers. Nothing has actually moved forward. Nothing of note has been created. We simply have the same functions in a smaller single device. A lot of hype and froth, slick advertising, and the result is $31 billion in revenues. In my industry, the pharmaceutical industry, we also have an industry of incremental innovations, with Me Too drugs actually being the norm. That is, a drug that is structurally very similar to an already well-known and well-prescribed drug, with only minor differences. Me Too drugs are currently netting my industry $300 billion a year in sales. The free market is absolutely wonderful at helping to deliver shiny plastic consumer goods into the hands of people and cheap food into their bellies so they can go and fuck, make more people who then go and fuck to make more copies of themselves, buy more shiny products, and the cycle goes on. However, in my opinion, it is the desirability or lack thereof of the laissez-faire system that is most important. And I also want to look at the issue of violence in this video. This may seem like a bit of an off topic for this video, but I promise I'm going to bring this all back into one kind of central unifying thesis soon. Now, when one looks at the issue of, let's say, violence in a stateless society, one of the issues that humans will unfortunately confront if the state were to disappear tomorrow are increased levels of societal violence, very specifically lethal violence. And I have covered this in a number of videos, including Gender in Post-Government Societies, where I explored the situation after the Balkan War, as well as the first video in the series, where I explored violence in prehistory barter societies. For a moment, let's take a very, very long, hard look at the human ape, minus the decoration of civilization, cities, police, armies, and Leviathan. What we notice is a pattern of murder, terror, and inflicted suffering from prehistory till the present age. The simple fact is that humans are not particularly peace-loving. And how could we be? We live on a planet with finite resources, but infinite desires and needs. The fact that we now believe in the myth of the noble savage points to both the failings of the community of historians to vividly paint reliable pictures of our past, or simply that we are looking at the past through today's lens and with today's mores. Not 150 years ago in Europe, it would have been completely acceptable for the head or even just a simple member of the local constabulary to torture me to obtain a confession, which would then be used to justify my subsequent execution. This action today would likely have my captor jailed and punished. Back then, it was simply routine. Within prehistory, humans had to cope with a level of violence that gave them an even chance of being a victim of homicide in their lifetime. And that is an unthinkable level of violence, not even experienced in today's war zones. And in forgetting just how violent we once were, we fail to realize the work that organized violence, i.e. the state, has done to curb individual violence. The state has collectively claimed the right to be the sole wielder of societal preemptive and punitive violence, and society has become far safer for it. In days gone by, a man could murder me and expect little in the way of reprisal. Nowadays, the paid agents of the state, invested to a limited degree with state powers, would hunt my killer till justice was served. Now, one can argue, credibly, that I'm already dead, and, his or her incarceration can't bring me back, and this is certainly true. However, the threat is certainly a reliable preventative means of reducing all forms of violence. For example, persons are less likely to engage in fisticuffs if they will both face arrest, even if they both decline to press charges against one another, since this has been deemed to be a public order offense as opposed to simply being a bodily harm offense. The state, for all of its faults, has outdone itself in the area of societal violence reduction within its own borders. Now, of course, the state is hugely problematic in increasing violence outside of its borders, but that's probably a discussion for another video. It's also quite telling to note that the first thing people do when a state fails is to immediately flee to a territory with a functional state. Notice the wave of immigrants from conflicts in Ethiopia, Somalia, Nigeria during our own civil war, and Syria. It seems that the freedoms afforded to these individuals by a breakdown of their government and their new tax-free status could do little to persuade them to stay put. So the question which you might ask yourself, which I guess lots and lots of people have answered, well, by voting with their feet, is what do you value more, your money or your life? I am also deeply skeptical about many of the proposed solutions for replacing the protections of the state, such as private insurers, private police, or private armies, but not for the reasons one supposes. Frankly, I see little to suppose that these groups will turn brigand. My concern is, why has this not been tried before? Humans have experimented with almost every form of mutual protection, including city-states, armed camps, armies, police, militia, and even neutrality, except private insurers and private sector police. Because on some level, while we trust private companies to ferry us around the world, make our medicines and our clothing, we do not, collectively that is, trust private companies to invest them with the monopoly powers of violence, even in a limited geographical area. This lack of trust might prove to be the biggest impediment to successful implementation of a laissez-faire model. When we look at the bottleneck in male reproductive rates at the dawn of the agrarian age, what does this tell us? Well, in my opinion, it reveals two important facts. The first, pointed out by Stardust in his excellent video on Neolithic hypergamy, that yes, women are certainly hypergamous. Secondly, however, it's not unreasonable to assume that there simply were not many men alive at any one time to actually reproduce. Many would have died either in defensive or offensive armed conflicts. We also forget that socialism is in many ways a stepchild of capitalism. That is, as a society becomes wealthier, the sensibilities of people change. They're no longer content to see their fellows eking out a miserable living. And yes, men have been the beneficiaries of welfare as well. The reduced levels of crime and the reduced possibility of going out, so to speak, by means of a violent death. We within MGTOW like to point to the single mother welfare queen, but what about the police that prevents my neighbor, who might hate my guts, from putting a knife through it? Another important point to note is charity in the free market, and this, I believe, speaks very specifically to the lack of desirability of the laissez-faire model. We all, at one point, may fall on hard times, needing help up to gain our footing again. While private charities certainly exist, and I do accept the libertarian argument that government welfare discourages and crowds out private charity, Unfortunately, there seems to be no data available on the number of charities focused on women's issues versus men, nor the amount given to charities on a gendered basis. So here I'm going to have to simply speculate based on what we already know about the human ape. Recently, we saw Sargon and a number of men in the anti-feminist movement start a campaign to raise money for what they consider to be a good cause. Notice that despite the number of homeless, who are in the majority men, the number of men and boys failing to launch due to a female-focused education system, and Sargon's admission in his talk with Spinosaurus Kin and Stardust that gynocentrism is certainly a societal problem that leaves men at a severe disadvantage, he, in the words of Coltrane, tried to out-feminist the feminists by raising money for a women's charity, despite the fact that women are the most privileged and cared for group in our society. This gives us a really interesting glimpse into private charity, men coming together to help, in the majority of occasions, women. There is nothing to suggest that this will not be the same in the absence of government. And the reason for this is an innate gynocentrism that tells men to be a man and just deal with it. Well, if you lost your job, pick yourself up and get on with it. You were divorced, raped, well, don't be bitter. Just get up and go ahead and deal with it. It's important to note that many forms of charity, such as assistance to poor single women and to prostitutes, target females specifically and actually have no male counterpart. Furthermore, when one looks at the patterns of charitable giving in medieval societies, donors seem to have an interest in promoting and preserving families and a social consciousness that privileged the so-called deserving poor over their marginalized sisters and brothers. In private charities, single men are fucked if we fall on hard times. Just before we continue, I think it's important to discuss polygamy and be mindful that not every man can compete successfully in a free market. As content producers including Stardust, Coltrane and Barbarossa have pointed out, a fierce competition is now emerging in most mechanized countries by men for female attention. It has led to the emergence of a pickup artist movement and the emergence of white and black nationalists who are almost to a man, as both Stardust and Coltrane have pointed out. They're pretty much just sexually disenfranchised guys, and they're seeking a myriad of solutions, sometimes peaceful, sometimes violent, to solve these issues. The PUA proposes game, the white nationalist talks about hanging people. So my goal in this part of the video is to address this phenomenon within the context of the States. Let's say you have a small city. We're going to assume all of the inhabitants are adults for the purposes of this thought experiment, so please do bear with me. This city is made up of 100,000 persons, 50,000 of men, and the same number of women. The top 500 most influential men each have 4 wives and 4 mistresses. The next 2,000 most influential males each have 2 wives and 2 mistresses, and the next 10,000 most influential males each have a wife and a mistress. So here, the top 12,500 men monopolize the most desirable 32,000 females. We would rightly call this a polygamous society, where the remaining 37,500 men are striving to win the affection of the remaining 18,000 females. For every woman who is not in that top tier of attractiveness or desirability, there are 2 willing men. And for every man who is not in that top tier of attractiveness, there are 0.5 women. I do not need to explain to you how this city will quickly develop a burgeoning PUA movement, how peacocking will become the norm, how the Rouge V's of this world will set up seminars and publish books to make a quick buck, how sexual fidelity on the part of the woman will quickly become an ideal abandoned, how hypergamy will most certainly become maladaptive, how the majority of men will work slavishly to acquire and keep any woman who bothers to notice him, how the physical, emotional, and behavioral standards of women will slip, as a man who understands demand and supply. You don't need me to explain this to you. You also probably don't need much convincing that if these 37,500 men are unsuccessful in their attempts, that is to, find a partner, you will find simmering resentment, conspiracy theories about how the Central Intelligence Agency destabilized a delicate pre-polygamous sexual market, how women have changed, how academics who died hundreds of years ago have infected the minds of these women and made them unapproachable. After a while, you would simply do the maths, look at the laws of demand and supply, and perhaps make an educated guess that such a society has the potential for incredible violence and political instability by pressure groups who are sexually disenfranchised and vote on average for political solutions to remove any foreign supply of males who might compete with them for the limited number of available females. One of the things that libertarians within the men's movement fail to, fully realize is that on some level, society actually used to be like this, where the most powerful man monopolized available women and the other men fought a lifelong struggle for reproductive access. And what I want to do here is to explore the consequences of polygamy. Firstly, in their 2012 article, The Puzzle of Monogamous Marriage, appearing in Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society, Joseph Heinrich, Robert Boyd, and Peter Reichson used converging lines of evidence from the social sciences to compare polygamous and monogamous societies. They found that polygamous societies differed from monogamous societies in terms of factors such as violent crimes and economic productivity. As Heinrich and colleagues note, faced with higher levels of intra-sexual competition and little chance of obtaining even one lifelong mate, unmarried, low-status men will heavily discount the future and more readily engage in risky, status-elevating and sex-seeking behaviors. This will result in higher rates of murder, theft, rape, social destruction, kidnapping, especially of females, sexual slavery, and prostitution. The authors then argue that the gradual and erratic imposition over many centuries of normative monogamy in Europe and then much of the rest of the world was motivated largely by rulers wanting to suppress crime and violence. Or perhaps we might look at it another way. Societies that suppressed polygamy proved more successful, displacing those that didn't. Professor Heinrich even argues that the advance of monogamy played a part in the Industrial Revolution, reducing the pool of unmarried men and leveling the reproductive playing field not only decreased crime but spurred commerce and innovation. Once men stopped striving to achieve marriage or double marriage, they invest their energies, it seems, in more productive ambitions. And as I discussed this phenomenon in my video, The New Malthusian Trap, men go from creativity and productivity to focusing one's entire youth, the most creative and energetic part of one's life usually, purely on the sexual dominance hierarchy, and then desperately trying to maintain the sexual access one has acquired. We see examples of this in the field of mathematics, where famous mathematician G.H. Hardy wrote in his 1940 memoir, A Mathematician's Apology, quote, "No mathematician should ever allow himself to forget that mathematics, more than any other art or science, is a young man's game," unquote. For centuries, it has been commonly an accepted belief that youth is the most important ingredient for greatness in mathematics. Think of a young John Nash in A Beautiful Mind, discovering the Nash equilibrium in a smoky bar, or the aged mathematician in Proof, who revolutionized the field twice before he was 22. Another example is French mathematician Galois. He was responsible for the Galois theory, an important branch of abstract algebra, and he came up with this while being, a political activist, where he was serving a 9-month jail sentence for having an affair with a physician's daughter. And he accomplished this all before he was killed in a duel at the age of 21. And I'm going to hypothesize that at an early age, unweighted by the expectations of societies and females to settle down. Without the drudgery of weekend IKEA trips and domesticated microwave dinners, he had time to follow his passions, work well into the early hours of the morning, without the threat of divorce and alimony hanging over him. When, the moment he got married, he traded his greatness for a steady but soon decreasing supply of sex. So I guess what I'm driving at is that society, minus the redistribution powers of the states, we will notice the most economically successful men monopolize the women. As women flock to them, we will have hypergamy run amok. In fact, what government has done with the taxation state, where they redistribute wealth from the most financially successful males to the less financially successful males, is to also expand sexual access. Well, the bottleneck that Stardust described in Neolithic hypergamy. The state expanded those who were deemed suitable for the purposes of reproduction by leveling the playing field for every man. It's also important to note that a feature of polygamy is technological backwardness, often deliberately, but by the more reproductively successful males in a society who seek to preserve the status quo. Another feature is, of course, violence, as the sexually disenfranchised resort to ever increasingly desperate means to change their genetic trajectory. The emergence of a middle class reduced polygamy, since more men were in the social strata that women deemed acceptable for mating. For the final part of this video, I do want you to consider an important question. I'm assuming you're not, of course, misanthropic. And that is humanity worth saving? Do we wish to have a species that might one day roam the stars, or shall we live out our existence on Earth and admit when our run is at an end as a species? Are the most important tasks for our species to focus on which brand of smartphone is best, which car has the widest rims, or what this season's fashion and makeup are? I believe, and this is just my opinion, that our biggest goals ought to be to get off this planet. So again, consider the issues that we face. Number one, runaway spending on welfare programs. Not just welfare, but also wider social programs. Number two, rampant gynocentrism. Number three, an electoral process that is just complete with fraud. Number four, extinction level events. Number five, dependence on toxic fuels and chemicals. And number six, overpopulation. And a scientific meritocracy, which I'm certainly proposing, is actually rather simple. Decisions by a group of elected persons with population members having to earn the vote based on a range of prerequisites, which perhaps might be, achievement, or a broad understanding of important subjects such as economics, ethics, philosophy. And Stardust and I have discussed this in a discussion on his channel. Proven honesty might be one of those prerequisites, and morality, as we define it. There would be a vote, of course. However, society would be organized to have a single or a number of, just very few multiple broad purposes. An example might be the development of a clean energy source. A scientific meritocracy is certainly not freedom as we know it. However, ask yourself, will the freedom to vote help us as a species solve the greatest issues that we have? And Coltrane has addressed this rather well in his video, where he discussed the fact that, for all intents and purposes, our politicians are glorified salespersons selling the ideas developed by the bureaucracy who work behind them. And just in terms of the voting, because I know a lot of people have a problem with this, and I'm not just saying, hey, let's remove the female vote. I don't believe that will solve any issue. And I'm very, very grateful that Coltrane put out his video. Because what we might ask yourself is, how many people do you know, both male and female, that actually understand the consequences of voting and have a long-term perspective, the kind needed to vote reasonably? A scientific meritocracy may certainly remove basic rights, such as the right to reproduce indiscriminately. However, ask yourself, understanding our resource constraints as a species and climate change, are we comfortable as a species permitting our fellows to reproduce without checks and balances, considering that reproduction itself imposes, in many ways, negative externalities on the environment? A scientific meritocracy will certainly mean people making decisions for you in one way or another. However, ask yourself, does this not happen now with far less rigor and purpose? A scientific meritocracy will certainly mean the removal of the female and the male votes from all but the most appropriate men and women. But ask yourself, can the average woman or man be trusted with the vote? A scientific meritocracy would mean rule by a select group of individuals. But ask yourself, would you rather be ruled by the whims, shallowness, and juvenility of the masses? A scientific meritocracy would mean having a unified purpose as a species. Ask yourself, how far will we get by electing the best looking empty suits every 4 years? So again, I want you to consider how you voted earlier on, and I want you to recast the vote again now. A yay or a nay will suffice. Do you agree that 1. All adult females ought to have the right to vote? 2. All adult males ought to have the right to vote? 3. The best government is one that governs the least. 4. My individual liberty is of paramount importance to me. 5. I am against government policies that reduce my individual rights. And number 6. It's important that our species preserve the Earth's natural resources. And I would also go as far as to ask this question, and it's probably a loaded question, and that is, can we as a species achieve anything of note without limiting reproductive freedoms of the masses, limiting the rights of women, limiting the rights of men, even if many of these rights seem natural? Civilization is a story of a struggle against the animal mind, as Barbarossa once stated. I agree with him. Our development came about partly due to the fact that we specifically limited some of our most violent, base, and animalistic tendencies. We punished the murderer, jailed the thief, demanded the upholding of contracts, saved for the future, prohibited rape, and attempted to do away with war, despite the fact that these things are quite natural. I mean, they happen within the animal kingdom. They're also very harmful. Might we also do the same for activities which prevent our escaping extinction? The final point which I will address in this video is perhaps the most important, an area where libertarians and advocates of a resource-based economy may have the most legitimate cause for concern with my thesis, and that rests in the area of technological advancement. And I believe that these individuals will point to the actually quite impressive record of the free market in ushering, in the industrial and internet ages, that we are now on the verge of a robotics age. They will point to the waste inherent in government research and focus quite rightly on the bureaucracy that has turned NASA from an agency that once took us to the moon to the agency that since the year 2000 has developed no new technologies of note. Here they actually do have a real point, one very grounded in the realities inherent in governmental bodies, who are of course not subject to the dictates of profit and loss. To these persons, my answer is simple. Humanity has, in our own lifetime, produced rare giants such as Elon Musk and Richard Branson. Men who not only have the vision needed to drive our species forward, but also have the financial acumen, which is so essential. With the hope of a return, these men are pioneering forward and have achieved great things already. However, 10 men and 8 billion is scarcely sufficient. The free market might get us to where we need to go. However, I sincerely doubt it can be done within the time frame needed. That is, before we destroy ourselves or random chance, the same kind of chance that got us so far, turns against us. Our species needs hundreds, if not thousands, then perhaps even tens of thousands of such men, and the resources of an entire planet behind them. If we are ultimately to solve mankind's greatest challenges, we cannot rely on hope or prayer. When one looks at the 10 technologies that have defined the 20th century, we find centralized violence behind it, through its ability to tax and the right environments governments have funded or initiated, things including nuclear power, the personal computer, internet, rockets, and submarines. And behind them all, we find the financial backing of organized violence, and that is the state. Thank you very, very much. This is CS MGTOW.
We're gonna take a break. Don't touch that dial.
Too fat and lazy to come pick up a bazooka? Log on and have it at your door the next morning. Log on to ammunition.net. Try our motion-sensitive cluster bombs and shoot-to-maim automated firing gun turrets, which come ready to assemble in 284 easy parts. Ammunition.net also has a full line of generators so you can keep your fridge running and the beer cold through extended apocalypse. Need to stock up fast? The strongest will survive with our all-in-one Y2K kit featuring a tractor-trailer load of lager beer, redwood cigarettes, and enough firepower and ammunition to level a small country. Jesus fuck! Y2K! It's coming, and you'd better be ready. Log on to ammunition.net now. Protecting your rights online.
Hey, is there a job where I could shoot someone or sexually molest them and then not get in trouble?
There sure is. Listen.
I'm power-hungry, paunchy, and balding. How can I be a hero?
By shooting people for the state. Become one of Liberty City's finest, and you'll be a hero today. All it takes is 2 weeks training and a non-refundable deposit for your uniform and bullets, and you're ready to enforce the law. Finally get the respect you deserve as a member of the Liberty City Police Department. You'll always be right. Meet new members of your community and beat them senseless for getting on your nerves or because you're drunk. Become the law.
I'm on a power trip that lasts a lifetime.
At long last, you're a man. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Become one of Liberty City's finest. Enroll today.
Sebastian, it's okay. It happens to a lot of boys.
I'm sorry, Miss Cornelius.
We'll try after class tomorrow.
Erectile dysfunction can start early, just when you depend on your penis the most, like a romantic encounter with your 8th grade teacher. That's why there's Moneyless. Moneyless removes the anxiety that can often accompany your first special times, so you can have the confidence and stamina to make an impression that lasts.
Hey, Miss Cornelius, can I, see you after class?
Wow, Sebastian. Looks like somebody's gonna earn an A.
Ask your pediatrician about Moneyless, or order online from any number of disreputable Mexican pharmacists. Moneyless is Vesuvius citrate and should be taken with alcohol. Moneyless, prepare for the explosion.